Whether you're looking for answers to specific life questions or simply hoping to become the best version of you possible, welcome to the Mental Breakdown and Psychreg podcast, where we offer insight, information, and strategies based upon research and years of practice as psychologists. So sit back, have a listen, and get connected with our hosts, Dr. Berney and Dr. Richard Marshall.
Because of the timing of our landing and when we'll be finally getting back to Florida, we decided that we were going to go ahead and record a second podcast for Tuesday of this week.
Since today is...
we
always have to pause.
Recurring joke all week.
We always have to pause because we're in Taiwan.
We're in Taiwan right now.
And that puts us a day ahead.
12 hours ahead
of
Florida.
Of what it would have been, what it is in Florida at the time.
So we're recording at 4 p.m. on Saturday,
right.
the 5th. And so that means it is 5 a.m. Sunday morning, or 4 a.m. Sunday morning,
right?
In Florida.
Right. That's right.
So,
but sometimes it's different days.
Yes. Yeah, it was so funny that when we first arrived in the Philippines, it was Wednesday morning, and my son was going down to Miami with my mom and some others to the Manchester United Real Madrid match, and we were in Manila at 11 o'clock, it was in Taipei at 8 o'clock Wednesday morning, and the match was just starting at 8 p.m. Tuesday night. So it was it's so very distracting with all this stuff going on over there. Because what's odd is this is the place that everything has to happen. It's
right.
Like right here for some reason.
Right. So there's a whole terminal here, and it seems to be occurring right outside.
Yeah, the hallway door. Is like
it's been quiet
for
an hour, now. Oh, there, it's gotten quiet again.
There we go.
Yeah.
It'll last for a few minutes.
Cacophony of sounds every once in a while, but bear with us.
But anyways, the bottom line was that it was Wednesday morning where we were, but they were living live Tuesday night.
Right. So Einstein was right.
Yeah.
Do this fast enough, odd things happen.
Yeah. So, but we are we're going to record today to talk a little bit about just some of the topics that we heard at this conference that we just spent 3 days at, and I'll still have to make sure that my computer stays awake.
Yeah, every once in a while, Bernie's going to bend over to reoxygenate his brain. No, we're going to we're hoping to talk about two things. One is the various topics that were discussed, but also the culture. It wasn't culture shock. It was the cultural differences that we encountered being close to the Filipino people. Right. And you suddenly, when you start talking about child rearing and teaching and psychology, you become aware of the vast cultural differences that exist.
Absolutely.
So there's, I'd like to throw some of that in toward the end.
Oh, no, absolutely. So when the conference opened on Thursday, the first speaker was an impressive, a man with an impressive background and just set of experiences, and that was Dr. Jamie Hacker-Hughes from the UK. Dr. Hacker-Hughes has been a clinical psychologist for 25 years. Oh,
yeah.
And during all that time, he has primarily worked in the area of stress and trauma.
Right.
And so his talk was about the impact and the effects of stress and trauma on people's functioning.
Right. There's a intervention for trauma called EMDR.
Right.
And Dr. Hacker was one of the first people in the UK. He was back in the 1980s.
Right.
When it first came out, he was one of the first people to be trained in EMDR and continues to use it. He said he uses it every day in his practice.
Right. We're working to get him on as well. He was one of the interviews that we have not yet done.
Right.
But he has promised that we will be able to do that, to have him on to talk specifically about EMDR and how he uses it with trauma. But also he also works with addictions.
Right.
So it's going to be a great. But he set the stage so well because the presentations thereafter. And this was one of the amazing things. We kind of mentioned it in the last podcast, just how multidisciplinary the presenters were. But he set the stage so well, because I think that just about everyone else that presented referred back to his presentation, because we were talking about the effects of stress and negative experiences on our lives, and how it affects the way that we function, and our need for treatment and various services.
Yeah, it really was, because two of the speakers talked about prisoners, those who are incarcerated, and the stress and the trauma that they experience in jails and prisons. And Dr. Fraser Smith talked about the changes and the stress as men age. He's a specialist in elderly, what happens to men as they age. Yeah. And it's a virtually unexplored territory. And he talks about the stresses and the mental illnesses and the dementias that set in men over the age of 60. And Dean Wilkinson, Dr. Dean Wilkinson, talked about the stressors in the elderly incarcerated, which is a subpopulation. Imagine being in prison and you're developing dementia, but you're in that prison and you become victimized. And it was absolutely fascinating stuff that they were talking about.
Right. Yeah. So but it goes to show, we talk about stress a lot on this podcast, and the overall effects that it has on our functioning. But what this conference demonstrated is that even though we feel like we talk about it a lot, there's still a lot of areas that are affected by stress that we haven't even considered or haven't even thought about.
I hadn't thought about the prison population at all.
Not at all.
I mean, we all know what happens to anybody in the aging process. If you're in prison, you have a unique set of challenges that essentially remain unaddressed, except by people like Dean and Laura Caulfield and Dean Wilkinson, who are addressing the needs of prisoners.
Absolutely. So it's wonderful that people are doing this research and looking into some of these issues, because and it's just amazing to me how people find their various niches, and they go into again areas that others may not have ever even considered or thought about, and here we have the opportunity to meet experts in those areas.
Right. One of the fascinating things as we were interviewing the various presenters, invariably they talked about, well, I'm sort of an accidental psychologist. I didn't grow up wanting to be a psychologist, but we all ended up in the field. And then the next question was, how did you choose the area of to specialize? Why are you specializing in this? Absolutely fascinating stories, and we'll have those podcasts over the coming weeks. Fascinating personal stories and decisions that were made, but it was an eye-opening experience, and I think we mentioned in an earlier podcast, not only was it rewarding professionally, but at a personal level. It feels like we made lifelong friends.
Right. But to your point about culture, my minor in undergraduate was in anthropology. And the reason I minored in anthropology was I'm fascinated by cultural differences and the variability in the way that people, just the way that life is experienced by different people in different places and from different walks of life. And, when you come from a primarily Western culture, American culture, be even more specific, Southeastern American culture. Your worldview is shaped by the way that your parents teach you to do things, and that's the case wherever you are. But we would encourage you, get out and explore different things. Get out and meet different people, go to different places, because you really have no idea how much of your worldview is skewed until you see the way that other people live
and how they think.
Yeah, I mean, I sent pictures to my wife because it was just so fascinating. You think of breakfast. Right. What do we eat for breakfast? Eggs, bacon, or maybe waffles or toast and those kinds of things. So we go in for breakfast the first morning, and the first bin in the continental breakfast at the hotel.
Right.
The first bin is rice,
Right.
plain steamed rice and garlic rice.
Right.
The second one is eggs. But
hard
then
hard
the
boiled
third
fried.
one is fish.
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 And I mean fish.
Like
Heads,
like
tails.
whole fish.
Right.
Right. Yeah,
Right.
it was an entire fish. And then the third one was like
some kind of meat.
like a roast beef
Right.
of some sort.
Right.
So, you know,
And there was soup at one
and
end.
soup, right?
And salads and fruit.
That's right, salads.
And then they had toast.
And
the
then
other
they
two
have
they had
toast.
toast and cereal.
You never think about
the intention was to eat a big meal
Yeah.
for breakfast,
Yeah.
which is what we're told we should be doing.
Right.
You know, to eat your big meal at breakfast time.
And you know, I've talked before, and you know, like when you eat pizza for breakfast or something like that, and you joke and you say nobody ever said, you know, pizza can't be for breakfast, or this can't be for breakfast, or that can't be for breakfast.
In the Philippines, it would be perfectly okay. I mean,
Fish for breakfast.
that's what they would serve.
Yeah.
But as we were presenting our talks, and one of the things that struck us as we were talking about things, very naturally, we encourage Western parents to have their children be independent by the age of 18. And so during my talk, I said, you know, the goal of parenting is that by the time your child graduates from high school at 18, your child should be completely independent and no longer need you.
Right.
They were puzzled by that. Well, I didn't know it at the time, but and I didn't realize it at the time because I was caught up in the presentation. But afterwards, the Filipino professors said, "Oh, let us." Here's
Right.
what the students responded by saying, "What did he mean by that?" Because they stay home.
Yeah.
There's no
The Filipino parents are perfectly happy with their kids staying home.
there's no expectation that you'll become independent at 18.
Right.
You and children just stay in the home. They're welcome to stay for the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
There's no expectation that they will become independent at the age of 18. At end of life, we talked about the elderly prisoners, and Dr. Smith,
Fraser.
I'm going to call him Doctor. I have such respect for him and the work that he does.
Yeah.
He and the other woman, Isabel, from Colombia, are so far ahead of most students. You know that you don't think of them as students. But he specializes in men's issues as they age.
Yeah.
And we talk about what happens to the elderly in our culture. And again, it was a foreign concept because the Filipino people take care of the elderly.
Right.
I don't know that there's a concept of a nursing home.
Well,
they
say
stay in their home.
They say they have some, but they're newer things.
Right.
And they're not the same type of things that we have in the States.
Not what we have.
Right.
Because the expectation is that as you get older, you'll stay with your family.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So it's so helpful to go to other places and realize that this is the way we do it here, but it's just the way we do it here. It may not be the right way, but you run into these cultural differences, and it's good to be reminded that they exist.
Right. And the what is the again we think, okay, so this is the way that we live our life. This is the way that life is to be lived. And then you come to a place like this where the culture and lifestyles are so different.
Right.
Then you think, well, you know, these are just, you know, that's a small island. You know, what did he say? 25?
7,000 islands?
25 or 30 million people live in the Philippines.
And they speak 8 different languages.
There's 8 different main languages.
Right.
Because they have.
Because the Philippines are islands. It's a chain of islands, an archipelago.
Like 7,000 islands.
And they were independent, isolated from each other, and they
there's
developed
one bridge that connects any of the islands.
Right, and so they developed over time. They developed unique languages because they were so isolated.
Yeah, and they've been occupied by so many different groups, by the Spanish,
the Spanish influence,
English speakers. So it's fascinating. You know, if you have the opportunity and you have the interest, you should have the interest. But if you do have the interest, get out and check out some other cultures and learn the way that other individuals live, because they There's nothing that says that this is the right way to live, or that's the right way to live, or this is the right thing to do, or that's the right thing to do. It's just differences that we have among different cultures, and those cultures are informed by decades and hundreds of years of experience. And again, there's not anything that says that one is the right way and the other is the wrong.
And as you travel from country to country, you also realize that everybody considers his or her country the best.
Right.
So we do in America. It doesn't mean that it is the best. We consider it the best. But if you lived in Taiwan or the Philippines or any place else we've been, they consider their country the best.
And perhaps one can argue that ours is the best for the way that we live
That's right.
We live. Our culture would be very different to maintain difficult to maintain our culture
values, right,
in a different setting.
Yeah, the Filipino students are so incredibly polite, but they're also very obedient. It's almost embarrassing how we were treated. I mean, it wasn't, they weren't paying homage, but the respect level is so incredibly high there. And they acknowledge the difference in status between adults. And I was struck one morning, the faculty would escort us to various places, and the students would do exactly as they were told. And the faculty would say, do this, do this, do this. One time, one of the faculty members gave a student my briefcase and said, here, carry this. And he took it and he followed us around until I got settled. Yeah. And I was a bit embarrassed because it's culturally, it's so different.
Yeah.
And so what we do here wouldn't play well there.
Right. What we do in the United States.
What we do in the United States. Right.
So do get out and learn something about some other cultures, because again, things that we learned from the conference and things that we learned from this experience has been, they have some really good ideas.
They do.
The way that they perceive some things and that they do things, there's some things that are really, really good ideas, and it would be great. They have I can't wait to read it. Jamie Hacker Hughes was talking. He just had a chance while we were here, like within these past 3 days, he had a chance to read the new Filipino mental health movement act or something. It was an act, I think. And he said that it's amazing. He said it's so inclusive, and that we should be using them as models in the West. And so I can't wait to get my hands on that to see what they're doing with that.
Mm-hmm.
Other cultures, they've been around a long time too. Sometimes some of them have been around a lot longer than we have.
We've talked on our podcast about some Jewish traditions that we would be wise to adopt, and here we encountered these Filipino traditions which we might be wise to consider. But everybody believes his or her country is the greatest. So respect those differences.
So learn about a different culture today. Take a moment and see what else you can find out about the world. So all right,
okay,
that is it for today. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, don't forget to be afraid.
Thanks for sharing this episode of the Mental Breakdown and Psychreg podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to follow us on Twitter and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you will find all of our previous podcasts and much more. We would be honored if you would become a patron through patreon.com, where any donation you can manage will go to the development and creation of more content. Just visit patreon.com/thementalbreakdown for more information. Thanks again for listening. Have an awesome day, and we look forward to being back in your feed tomorrow morning.